Christchurch City Holdings Limited draft letter of expectations 2021 to 2022. Because I'm a director of CCHL, I'm going to have to vacate the chair, and because the Deputy Mayor is also a director of CCHL, he cannot assume the chair. So I will call on the meeting to nominate someone to chair the meeting for item 12.
I'd like to nominate James Daniels to chair.
Is there a seconder for that? Mike Davidson. Aaron?
No offence to James, I was going to nominate Yanni because he's been here for 50 years.
Right.
Happy for James to do it. I just had a procedural question.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But do you want to nominate Yanni as well?
Oh, not if he's backing James. I'll back James then.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. Thank you. Yanni?
I was just going to check, now that we're not going into public excluded, is it possible to make the report available to the public?
Yes, there were some last minute changes made to it this morning. It was only published this morning after our workshop on Tuesday. So it was only published for our information this morning. And so it hadn't, and there were a couple of changes that needed to be made to it. I think that a couple of the workshop recommendations hadn't quite been picked up in the language. So that's been fixed up as I understand it. So it should be ready for publication now.
It will be in just a few moments.
It will be in just a few moments. So it will be online, but councillors will have it on the hub.
Can we get some hard copies for the people that are here?
They're trying to get it online electronically.
Right, okay.
Can't just do more than one thing at a time. Yep. So if you could get someone, we could get a couple of hard copies from. It will just take a few moments because there isn't a printer in the chamber. So we will get to that as soon as possible. But if we slowly take our way through to voting in a chair, then that will assist the process of getting the documentation in the public arena as quickly as possible. So I have the position of chair for item 12 has been moved and seconded. Are there any other nominations? I will therefore put the motion that James Daniels take the chair for item 12. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you. And the CCHL directors will step back from the table and not participate in the item.
I'll tell you that. You can sit here.
Kia ora tātou. If I had known I was going to be in this position, I'd have worn my rugby club jersey to represent Shirley Rugby Club. However, look, it's something I've just assumed, this role I've just assumed, so I call on my colleagues to assist me and us through this very important paper we're considering this morning. So I welcome to the table Linda Gibb, Performance Monitoring Advisor from City Council, Diane Brandish, the Acting General Manager of Finance and Commercial, and Ian Thompson, our General Counsel for City Council, and ask you to take us through this paper, this report.
The first thing I would like to start with is just to talk to the purpose of an LOE. It is an administrative tool used to convey shareholders high-level key strategic expectations of the company, or in the case of the letter to CCHL, who then will transmit expectations through to each of the companies in the group. On receipt of an LOE, the board will consider the content and it will, taking into account its own obligations under the Companies Act to act in the best interests of the company, will do one of two things. It will either agree and action those expectations, or we would expect them to come back to us and to want to discuss with you any of the expectations that it cannot, that it feels it cannot progress. The content of the LOE should, where it's agreed by the company, then be reflected in the statement of intent. But it's important to note that the letter of expectation is a high-level strategic document. There is some content that may not be appropriate for the level of an SOI, which is also high level, but it should be, the expectations will flow through to business plans, and that is why we issue an LOE before, in this case, CCHL Group works through its business plans so that that all comes together into the SOI. When we get the SOI, it's a draft and it's due, it's a statutory obligation due on the 1st of March, and we review the SOI to understand the extent to which the expectations have been reflected in there. We'll staff advise you of any omissions. There'll be engagement on that, and then the final SOI will reflect comments made and engagement had. That covers the purpose and the process. In developing letters of expectation, we have generally engaged, well, we've had the experience over a course of a year to see where councillors are, what their issues are as they're raised from time to time in regular briefings that CCHL provides. We've generally, we would hold a workshop. We didn't this year because of the delays the encumbrance of the COVID-19 lockdown, followed by the pressures that came up after that. We focused the LOE primarily on recovery. We've heard feedback from council that they wanted that you wanted strengthening of the climate change and governance provisions of the LOE, and this final LOE or final draft LOE reflects those conversations.
Okay, so it's fair to say, given that this is now in public, and it wasn't expected to be so, anyone who's watching and here attending doesn't have much in the way of documentation at this stage. Am I correct? So, in other words, the draft LOE that we've got is not widely available in this chamber. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That is correct, yeah.
We're Chair, we're just about to have 5 copies handed out, so we've got them.
So we're going to need to, we will do that, but of course people who are participating by being here will not be able to see what we're talking about. Nevertheless, I think it's important that we get on with it, because as you've already indicated, we've got a time pressure and that we're behind. Did I get that right? We're behind time now in terms of the timeline for the letter of expectation.
Yes.
And the statement of intent is due back from CCHL on the 1st of March?
The draft version
The
is,
draft,
yes. Yes,
yeah.
we have offered, because we are now running about a month behind or thereabouts, we have offered that if they need it, we can give them a 1-month extension. That's provided for in the Local Government Act.
That's fine, okay. So, do I have any questions from the, around the chamber? Yanni?
Thank you. Thank you for your description at the start, the explanation. I was just wondering if you've considered using a statement of expectation, which I understand is a tool that we can use, that can set out in some detail some quite clear outcomes that we would like from our CCOs and CCHL, and why we haven't used that mechanism.
The statement of expectations is a new tool added to the governance toolbox by the in the LGA amendments of 2019. The letter of expectation has been a long-held tool that is commonly understood by both the Crown and local government, and in reading the statement of expectation clause, it didn't appear to offer anything other than some legal status that we weren't able to get through the LOE, so we've continued to issue an LOE. I think the Auckland Council review, Auckland CCO review, indicated that the statement of expectation hasn't been used at all, either by Auckland Council or anybody else, and I think that's its conclusion was for the same reasons, that the LOE gets you where you need to be.
So I agree with Linda's comments.
Right, so just so I'm clear, there's nothing stopping us from doing a statement of expectation. If we resolve to do it, we could.
You could.
And that could do more than a letter of expectation, which isn't, the letter of expectation isn't a mandatory requirement.
No, it's not, but historically it's been a kind of direction to our CCO, CCHL, as to what we would expect in the statement of intent. The statement of expectations in the Act is a much more broad, it takes a much more broad approach, talks about relationships with Māori and with the council. The letter of expectations that the council has been preparing, as I said, are a little more focused on what they would like to see in the statement of intent.
But having said that, there is no reason why the LOE could not include anything that is in the statement that might be included in the statement of expectations. It doesn't actually provide for us to do any more than we could otherwise, because the letter of expectation is an administrative tool and its content is discretionary.
Right. Can I just check in terms of the amended letter of expectation? There's a number of changes that have been made since the workshop, and I think we heard earlier today, this morning, that some things have been removed. In particular, for example, asking CCHL to continue monitoring around our request around executive remuneration, and I wasn't quite sure when that, why that decision was made to amend it. So is someone just able to kind of go through how the amendments have been made?
Yes, I can talk to that. We're asked after the workshop Tuesday to make the document less detailed and more of a high-level strategic document. That sentence was actually omitted in error and has been put back in this morning.
So, sorry, just I've put the question through ahead of the meeting yesterday morning. In the draft letter that we had at the workshop, it said that we would continue to request CCHL to report on our expectations of executive remuneration. I haven't had any copies of those reports. Are they available? Are they still going to continue? And I heard that we'd change the letter to take that out because they weren't doing that. So just was trying to understand that.
So the actual reporting that CCHL does is not a report, it's a verbal report, I guess, on what they have been able to do in that regard. It comes up usually every quarterly report, and they talk to that issue.
So what's our sense of how well they've been responding to what we've put in the letter of expectation in the statement of intent around senior executive remuneration?
Well, I think that the nub of that issue is that the boards of the entities are the ones that are responsible for setting remuneration, and that there are a lot of trade-offs that they take into account when they're looking for their executives. CCHL has continuously advised that they have been very strong on their advice to their subsidiary boards about exercising restraint. They've also been quite clear that there is very little more they can do in that regard.
Okay.
To reinforce the
What's that
issue,
for the
Councillor Johansson, that statement in terms of expecting CCHL to continue to pursue that matter is in the letter of expectation.
The concern, if I just raise the concern is we've repeatedly put that in and we don't know how that's being achieved. And, you know, that's why I thought the ongoing monitoring was quite important, and maybe we need to ask for an increase in the reporting around the things. But I've sent councillors a copy of a proposed amendment to address some of the remuneration thing through the statement of expectation request. So I'll just leave it for that.
I'll just add, though, that in version 2 that has now been circulated in the chamber, that sentence or that issue of remuneration expectations has been, as Linda said, has been restored to the letter, and we're asking that CCHL briefs us on specific issues, including that. So we will ask them for updates through the year. It's not specific as to how many or how few reports they make to us. Okay.
Just the final question I had was in regards to the Terrace Airport proposal. I think what we're hearing from a community is that they really want the ability for council to provide some direction on that issue. And I appreciate it's in the early stage, but what could we put in the letter of expectation that would set out clearly to CCHL that we would expect that there's a clear decision-making framework that highlights where the community and elected members, who are the major shareholder of the airport and also the full shareholder of CCHL, have input?
The revised draft was strengthened following the briefing the other day, and actually now says that we welcome the opportunity to work closer with CCHL and with their subsidiary companies to assure an effective and aligned approach to climate change. So it recognises the work they've been done and requests a closer working together. Now remember, this is a strategic document, it's not a list of tasks, so that this change we feel encompasses what CCHL and the airport are working on.
The question really is, can we have something very specific about the Terrace Airport proposal that sets out a clear expectation of how, of the community and elected members being clear about who's making decisions and when, and what the opportunity is for strategic direction input?
Okay, I'd ask Ian Thompson as the General Counsel to comment on that.
Firstly, I support what Di said, that this is a strategic document, and it's not going to get down into the detail, the sort of detail that you're looking for. The other aspect to me also is that by making an amendment like that, the council does not really have sufficient information in front of it to make that decision or to pass that resolution. And I would be very careful about going down that track. I think what we've got in the document, we've made it clear. CCHL know what we're talking about, and it's just a instruction to CCHL that they continue to work with us, give us information as we want it. I mean, that's the whole point of these sort of documents, to maintain the contact. And I think what's in there is perfectly fine.
And I want to remind councillors that we had a briefing and a type of workshop the other day where we did discuss these matters, and as the General Counsel says, this is a high-level strategic letter of expectations.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Are you finished, Yanni?
Yeah, I'll save the rest for debate. I mean, I've circulated the amendments to you. I'll send them to the Secretary and Dawn as well. Cool.
Thank you. Melanie?
I've got a number of amendments that I've forwarded around too, but I presume that we do that during the debate section, is that right? Yeah. So my question is about, there's some, let me find it. It was under the governance section, and the very last sentence there, and where it talks about being the remuneration being directly linked to performance. So can you explain exactly what that means?
Well, I think it's saying just what it says. When we had the briefing the other day, you'll recall that the Chief Executive did say that monitoring the subsidiaries is wider than just monitoring their salaries. It's also about monitoring their performance and how they're delivering across all the things they've been asked to do. So monitoring salary alone would give you a very narrow perspective on what we have asked these subsidiaries to do in delivering Council's strategic direction. So this is talking about that wider view than just the very narrow view.
So one way of reading that might be that a bonus might be given if there's good performance. So that's the way I interpret that, which is not necessarily something I support.
I do think it actually says that.
No, but
that's
sort of how it reads to me. So when we get to debate, I'd like that bit to be removed.
Okay, that was a question. All right. Further questions from Pauline?
Just adding to what Melanie's trying to do here, I think rather than remove it, you'd like the wording clarified so that it doesn't imply bonuses are automatic for performance. Whereas Di's reading it in a converse manner to say that actually performance is valued, not just remuneration. But the way this is written, actually directly linked to performance, actually does imply there could be bonuses. So maybe it's just, rather than deleting it, it's just fixing the wording.
And if I can expand on that, and excuse me, Mr. Chair, for cutting across, that's why we've added the words public sector organisations, because public sector organisations, and councils in particular, do not get bonuses. Right? We're not saying don't pay bonuses, we're simply saying remember you're part of the public sector.
Yeah. Sorry, Diane, can you just repeat that, what you just said?
I'm saying that this council in particular does not pay bonuses, and it's part of a public sector ethos that you are paid a salary to do and to deliver on your job, right, but you don't get a bonus component. Now that, and I'm sorry, I may have misled you, it doesn't apply necessarily to all public sectors, but it certainly applies to this council, and that's when we say, and remember you're part of a public sector, we're not saying don't pay a bonus, we're saying be mindful that you are employed to deliver on your job. And as you said, I also interpret it both ways, which is, you know, you are there to deliver, to constantly show that you are delivering against the expectations of council.
So to be clear, I thought you said that we don't pay bonuses in the CCHL group.
No, I'm saying we don't pay bonuses in council.
Oh, in council, right.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. Pauline, you finished? Okay. Jake?
I'm not necessarily saying I have an opinion that we should be very prescriptive in our letters of intent, but I am really keen to get a really clear opinion-free answer. Is there anything stopping us legally from being incredibly prescriptive about what we would like to see from CCHL?
Ian?
The answer should really pretty much just be a yes or no.
Right, well,
as much as it.
And Ian,
yes,
before you answer that,
Well, yes, that is an aspect, but the point of these is to just, in a broad-brushed way, give an expectation to CCHL what we would like to see in the statement of intent. Yes, you could specify something if you absolutely wanted to, but the point I made in terms of Councillor Johansson's amendment was that you're going down a track and making a decision in a situation where you don't really have enough information to make a decision of that nature. There would be a lot of advice you would need to get as to whether or not, I mean, the relationships, the point that the Chief Executive made about the Companies Act, the obligations of both CCHL and the Council, the separation of their duties, their rights, all of that sort of thing. You've just, no, well, that's important. And if you're going to talk about good process here, I don't think you're in a position to make that kind of call on the level of information that you have without making further inquiries and getting further advice. Now, that is my view. I just simply don't think you're in the right position, and you are in breach of your obligations under the Act. You and I have had that discussion before. You're in breach of your obligations under the Act if you would make a decision in those circumstances. Right?
Are there any more questions? You're clear? Okay. Jimmy.
Regarding the process, I mean, based on this, the letter of expectation as a strategic document, we approve today and release to the CCHL. And I would like to know if all those issues CCHL, if some item need to be clarified, more detailedly, what is the process feedback to us before they present the SOI to the council. Because this high level, probably interpretation, maybe bias, etc.
I'm sorry, Jimmy.
I mean, that because this high level strategic document, yes, for those later of expectation, am I right? Yes. We cover so many big items like recovery, COVID-19 recovery, yeah, prosperity economy, yes, and also progress report, reporting, etc. I mean, if the interpretation has misunderstanding how to fill the gap, then they can feedback to the council regarding to the practical SOI.
So what is the question? Just clearly state the question.
Question is interpretation of those high-level strategy. If the CCHL have a misunderstanding.
Well, remembering that the letter of expectation sets, yes, out obviously our expectations at a high level, and then their SOI.
But we need to release to them, yes.
Their SOI, statement of intent, is how they address our expectations. Where do you see the gap?
If you don't mind, Jimmy, what Jimmy's saying is that a lot of the statements are very, very broad, and various councillors have little more detailed bits, but they're not really covered in it. And I think that's pretty much what Jimmy's saying, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I would have thought that when we were discussing this on Tuesday, that it was made clear that this is a high-level strategic document that we're considering right now, and then we'll hear more detail back from the company, mm-hmm, through the statement of intent.
But that's the point that Jimmy and Jake are raising, is that does it strictly have to just be that, or can there be more detail? I think is where it's going.
I think the answer from Ian was fairly clear. Can you repeat, please?
I come back to the point that if you're wanting to add in reference to something like the terrace development, you're not in a position to actually make that call, make that decision. And in terms of the different levels, we've got provisions in here around climate change, and that was the point being made by Extinction Rebellion, and we've directed particular comments to the issue of climate change, and we would expect CCHL to reflect that in their statement of intent. So, and I think that's at the right level, the right pitch in terms of a letter of expectations.
Jake, you have a follow-up?
It's just so much opinion. I'm not talking about tariffs at all. I'm talking about salaries and how in future, over not this year, but in subsequent years, if we wanted to be quite prescriptive on certain points, can you as staff, is there anything stopping the letter from being prescriptive if we want it to be? Maybe not now, not today, in future, on certain subjects, if we want it to be, and can you help us do that in future?
I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about
that's
the
right.
other issue. In terms of remuneration, just to answer that point, Councillor Johansson mentioned clause 36A of Schedule 7 of the Act, which entitles the council to adopt a remuneration policy, but only for its employees, not for a CCO. So the CCO is separate from that, and you know, it would go against the usual division of responsibilities and duties if the council was to be prescriptive about something that it's actually CCO's responsibility to deal with. And yes, again, we've got in the letter of expectations the council's expectation in terms of remuneration. But I think you wouldn't want to step over the line and interfere with the management of the company by saying anything more specific.
Well, you're asking them to deliver stuff. You have to trust the board to know that they've got the right people there to deliver what we're asking them to deliver. So if you restrict in one area, then I think you are, I agree with Ian, you are cutting across the role of a council and the role of CCHL.
Yeah, I just want to remind all councillors that, and it's been stated before, that the companies are governed by the Companies Act, which is to act in the best interests of the company. It doesn't even say of the shareholder, right? And so bear that in mind. But the other thing is that the regarding remuneration, as Ian pointed out, under sections 36A, Schedule 7 of the Act, it limits that policy to council itself, not the company. So can we clear that? Can we clarify? Can we understand that?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right.
If it's a level of expectation, and so you've got elected members representing the public, and the public feedback to us stuff, one of them is, and it's in here, climate change. So the public, a percentage of the public have come to us and said, we want you to do more about it. We've put it in our level of expectation. So the expectation is those companies will, and there's some quite clear targets in here. And the point that Jake's raising is around remuneration, because we have people from the public come to us and say, why is the gap so big between the top end and the bottom end at the companies you own? And if we were trying to set a reasonable level of expectation, we would be saying that gap needs to narrow. We don't say that in here. We don't say over the coming years we want to see that gap narrow. Ben & Jerry's, for instance, had a 5 times rule. The CE couldn't be paid 5 times more than the lowest paid person. So if the top was going, the bottom had to go.
Hang on, is that a question?
Yeah, it is a question. Well, it started with a semi-statement. I learnt well from Councillor Daniels. That we've done it in one section here, but in the one that gets raised a lot by Councillors Johansson and now by McLennan, that one isn't addressed. And we're being told that it can't be, but it's only a level of expectation and it would be simple just to say that gap narrows. Just like we have with emissions. We've said that's got to narrow. That has to change. Can we not do the same with salary, is the question.
One of the requirements or obligations on a CCO in the Act is to be a good employer. So you would expect the CCO to conduct itself in a way that it is a good employer and looks after its employees. But I'd come back to the point that that is a matter for the company to determine as to whether or not they meet that obligation, rather than the council imposing rules on them.
But we did it for climate change.
Oh, no, it's not as particular in climate change. We're asking them to...
Yeah, we have serious targets in climate change, which we'll set as a council, and then as a council we don't get to have set serious targets around the wealth gap in this country. And as a public employer, we should be saying...
I'm going to call an end to this because that's for debate. I'll leave that for debate. We're on questions, and the Chief Executive has a comment to make.
So I just want to, in particular around pay restraints, there are 2 points made in the letter of expectation that are explicit. Okay. The first is we always, as always, we expect CCHL Group to exercise restraint in the level of senior executive total remuneration. And there's a little bit more. Taking into account the public service nature of the positions. And you, in your deliberations through the last year, have actually seen that take effect in certain board appointments in particular. At the end of that paragraph, it continues to clearly state remuneration packages should reflect that the companies are public sector organisations and be directly linked to performance. That's probably the strongest you've had it in your letter of expectation over many, many years.
Madam Senior, that doesn't address the gap though, and that's the problem in this country in the last 20 years, is the gap has just really started spreading. Yes, the bottom end has come up, definitely, I'll acknowledge that, but the top end has moved a lot more than the bottom. We're moving like that as a country. The pay difference between a policeman, a school teacher and an MP many years ago was 10%.
I'll let you have that much to say about it, but I'll leave that for debate. Any more questions? Questions only. Yanni.
The really hub of the question is, for the last, I don't know, few years, 5, maybe a little bit longer, 10, we've put the similar wording in about senior executive remuneration, and it hasn't actually achieved very much restraint at all. And I can go through and quote you the increases, which have been very significant, and actually a lot of the significant increases were directly linked to performance outside sometimes of the question, outside sometimes of the circumstance of that individual employee. So the question is just repeating the same thing that we've always repeated going to achieve what we want? And why do we have confidence that putting this in will actually lead to an improvement when we haven't seen that in the past?
Who's that question directed at?
To the people that...
Because I'll answer it if you want.
Put it in.
On behalf of the...
You know, like,
the meeting.
Is there anything further
I'll answer it then
that we can do?
Yes, there is. It's for us to be vigilant regarding this LOE and then the statement of intent. It's our responsibility to keep knocking on that door. We don't just let them run off and do what they want. They come back to us and report to us. So it's up to us to call them out on it.
With respect, some of us have been doing that for at least 10 years. And what we've seen is completely the opposite to what we would have expected.
Well, I'll offer this from the chair, that this is a new year. It's a new set of people from 18 months ago. And so it's up to us to do something about it in the first instance. And then you have the ultimate remedy, and that is if the board doesn't report what we want to hear or doesn't meet our performance expectations, that's when we're in a position to be able to make changes there. Okay, so ultimately the responsibility lies here. Are there any more questions? Because then we'll get to debate eventually. Okay, right. There being no more questions, I understand that there are some people that want to make excuse me, amendments to version 2 of the letter of expectations. Can you indicate, any of you indicate who wants to make amendments? Right, so I've got Mike, Yanni,
Melanie.
and Melanie, all right?
And Aaron.
Okay, and Aaron. Okay, can we, I want to, excuse me, I want to go through those amendments, or proposed amendments, before we get to debate. So Mike, would you start us, please?
It's actually very minor, it's just the third paragraph in,
Thanks.
and I just wanted to change the wording, social and or economic, to actually be social, environmental, and cultural and economic.
So what, how are we going to be able to do this? Can we put coloured amendments up?
We can track those changes in the letter, if we can just make it quite clear exactly.
I'm actually happy to include it and then move the whole lot.
Okay.
Okay, we just need
Okay.
to, sorry, just clarify exactly where the changes are, please.
Can you go through that again, please?
So is it in paragraph
I'll
one?
put an email through to Joe, but I'm happy to move an amendment to actually put that into the version and then move the version.
So it's the first paragraph under prosperous.
Third paragraph, yes.
All right.
Are these amendments
Got it.
what
Yeah,
you're
it's
talking
going
about?
up. It's going up.
Okay.
Okay. So they're in.
Just one moment. So I'm going to ask the meeting to consider whether we address each of these amendments individually, or that we put all the amendments on the table and adopt them as a whole.
Well, if this one's easy to address individually, it might be quite a good one just to get through. The other ones, without seeing them, I don't know. I would suggest individually is probably going to
Okay, we'll do them individually.
Sorry, as I offered, I was happy to actually put that into the version and then move the whole version, so therefore it's on the table. Yeah. Yeah, and if there's someone to second that, so. I've moved that, yeah.
And the whole.
So on the whole with that one addition to it.
Yeah, okay. And that moved Mike
Yep.
Seconder Paul.
Davison, seconder councillor Cotter. Are there any questions? Any debate? Sorry, I can't hear.
Yes, okay, sorry.
Go on,
Because then we
stand
can
at a
do-
mic.
We can.
Motion on the table, so the meeting is in debate. Using the rules of debate, there is the opportunity for members to speak once, move an amendment and have a seconder, but there's that one opportunity. So now there's a motion on the table. The appropriate way to deal with it would be to go into debate, people to move their further amendments.
Point of order, because we understood that we would all get a chance to make several amendments if we had them before we went into debate, which is what James said before.
Sorry, the other option that the council could consider is discussion with members who have amendments, raising them, and agree to informally put them in an updated version of the letter and then move to debate on that version of the letter. In that instance, Councillor Davidson has moved and seconded that, or Councillor Cotter seconded. You could, with the agreement of the meeting, withdraw that, and the meeting could consider continue discussing this version of the letter with an update, and then in due course somebody move the letter and then actually debate the points that have been added to it.
We still need to do the changes individually.
But you could do more than one vote, can't you?
Okay.
as the mover, can we just have a look at the amendments and maybe just to include them straight into the, yeah. Can we just have a look at what the amendments, proposed amendments are going to be? If we're happy with them, we can just include them straight into this motion.
I believe that both Councillor Johansson and Councillor Hoper have circulated their amendments.
So I suggest we just adjourn for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, we will adjourn for 10 minutes actually, while we make a decision here on where we go from here, okay? Thanks. And we restart the meeting, the adjourned meeting. Look, thank you for your patience in this matter. It's been quite complicated. Before I go any further, Tim, being on Zoom, did you have a comment? We can't hear you, sorry, at the moment. Did you? Yeah. Here we go.
Yeah, I'm fine at the moment, thank you.
Okay, right. What I've decided we'll do is we'll resolve our way forward in the next hour and a half. In other words, I'm calling a lunch break now, and when we come back, I expect that we will have a document that we can consider in its entirety, including all of the amendments that various members are wanting to make. Okay, and we'll consider it in one fell swoop from 22:02 onwards. All right, so we're adjourned for lunch. Thank you. See you then. Live stream back up, please. Thanks. Right, I'm vacating the chair for the moment. And adjourning item 12.
Can you ask Tim? Yeah, we've adjourned item 12 until
40.
1:40. Sorry, somebody should have asked me before they adjourned the meeting. So
You're doing a really good job, though, James.
you are doing a great job, James.
I'm okay.
I'm actually enjoying observing from a distance. Thank you.
My coffee's gone cold.
We'll
Okay,
get you a fresh one.
can you let me know when we're back on live stream?
We are.
All good to go? Thank you very much. Look, I'm resumed the chair so that I can again move the PX motion. There was only one item that was debated really at the last time we dealt with this motion. So it was moved by myself. It was seconded by Councillor Daniels, so I'll ask that Councillor Daniels again second it. So I will put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you very much. All right, so we're in PX now. We'll clear the room and we'll continue with the other items on the agenda. I promise that this